because everybody would want some, right? Put me there, put me there. All right. So domain and range, one more time, take two, okay? So this is something you're gonna have to practice. It's something you're gonna have to practice. There's no way around it. And here we go. So hopefully you did it. Okay, so we have our domain and we have the range for this particular scenario. I'm gonna use the set notation first. And I notice that my domain starts here and the graph stops right there. So I look along the x-axis, so from 0 to 17, that's where my domain is, okay? So in this case, t, right, the variable t, I'm going to use t in this case, 0 to 17 like that. And for the interval, it would just be 0, 17 like that, square brackets on both ends, okay? For the range, I look at the y. I travel along the y-axis, so I see graph, and some students want to stop there at the y-intercept. Don't stop. There's still a graph above it, and the vertex is basically that stopper there. Okay. For range, you will have to use your vertex when it's a parabola. So we go from 0 all the way to 18. Okay. So we're as a set notation, we'll use h for height, and it goes 18 like that. Okay, you may use x and y. You may use x and y if and only if you actually go to the x-axis and put an x under time, put a y by height. Then we understand. Then we have an agreement. Okay, you know which one is which. Okay? But other than that, use the letters that appear on the equation or on the graph. Okay? And so this goes from 0 to 18. By the way, part of the group work today is going to be me giving you just this, just the domain and range. And can you come up with a graph? Can you sketch me a graph that will make that happen? Kind of go backwards to this, okay? Because you should be able to do both, okay? Yay, fun, right? You have a weird definition of fun, Mr. Jackson. Okay, domain. So you see the graph down here. So you keep traveling. As long as you see graph either above or below it, you're fine. You stop right there. Okay, so for my domain, if you were to use set notation, I start at 0, right? And time is constrained, goes till 10. Okay, so I just look at the x value. So it goes from 0 to 10. For interval, it's just this. Okay. For the range, the lowest you possibly get is here, so you start there. I don't know if you noticed, but I start from the bottom up. Like, so when I read my graph, I go left to right on the domain, and I go bottom up on my range. That's usually in the order in which you're going to state your numbers, right? So you go from negative 20 all the way to 3, not 6. Don't grab the x value. It's all the way to 3. Okay, so for set notation, it's from negative 20, h for height, all the way to positive 3. You always want the lowest first, the greatest second. Okay, and then you go negative 20 to 3, like that. Okay. So that's your domain and range. Intro review. You didn't do parabolas, you did lines. I know that. But you did have, sometimes your teachers threw in some weird graphs. I know that. Some weird curves with straight lines. Do you remember the open dot and closed dot? We don't really worry about that in this course, okay? But you know what? I might bring that back just to make sure you understand. When is it round bracket? When is it square bracket? All of our questions are square brackets except for infinities. If there's an infinity, you would not put a square bracket around that one. Okay, so here we go one more time. For my domain, I start on the left, and I just go and stop right there. I no longer see graph past that. So 4.5, sorry, 4.5 is my stop there, and I start at 0. Okay, so for the domain, I'll go from 0, I'll use T for time again. This could be money, this could be anything down the road, okay? So just keep that in mind. Items sold, and so forth. So 0 to 4.5. Squiggly brackets, right? Or 0 to 4.5 like this. For the range, I use my other color. You don't start at the bottom, right? You don't see graph, you don't see graph. You start seeing a graph right about here at that height. So that's where my journey starts. And I keep going until I get to the highest point, which is determined by the vertex. And you're like, what about the y-intercept, Mr. Dirksen? It's just there. We know it's there, but it doesn't come into play when it's our domain and range, okay? Range for sure. So this would be 13 lowest, all the way to 32 is the highest y value acceptable. Beyond that, on either spectrum, it doesn't exist, okay? So we will go 13 all the way to 32, and then we go 13 to 32 when it's interval notation. Probably the most popular one. Interval is the most popular way to answer, but it doesn't have to. All right. But don't forget the domain and range for just regular parabolas where there is no word problem. Okay. If there is no word problem, I don't have room on this page, but I'll bring that back soon so you don't forget. So you should have, on your study sheet, you should have domain and range for non-contextual, like no word problems. And then you should have like domain and range for word problems, right? Like we treat them differently, okay? For example, don't write this down because it's gonna mess up your notes, right? But technically, if we were to just graph this in our calculator, your calculator would actually keep going indefinitely, right? Your calculator doesn't know that this is a word problem. So if I remove the word problem aspect from this, okay, my domain would be what? Anybody remember what the domain is? It just keeps on opening indefinitely on both ends. So you would say all real numbers, so that's like negative, that's negative infinity to positive infinity technically. And then the range would be, in this case, y is less than or equal to 32. That's it. That's your range. Just keep going down indefinitely. And here it would be negative infinity all the way to the highest point, which is 32, square bracket, right? So that's what we did before. But we put a stop to that because of word problems, you cannot have negative time, right? So we don't accept it. And sometimes the object lands and stops moving, time stops there. Like our timer literally goes, that's it, right? So that's why we don't continue either end. So it kind of is constrained that way. All right, let's go to 34. Just wondering, how many of you